Thank you. I guess what I was going to do was maybe, if you want to give maybe a quick overview, then I thought we could just open the floor. I know a lot of folks that jumped on said they didn't have any specific questions, and then we could go through a lot of the FAQs that you already created today, which I think is fantastic, and that might jog some additional thoughts, or how did you want to proceed? Oh, are we record? Do we need to record this?
Already started.
All right.
So again, welcome to everybody. Thank you for taking time away from your busy schedules tonight to spend some time talking about a return to in-person worship. You know, for some of you, these questions and these comments, the things that we raise are not going to be necessarily new for the most part, since many of them are things that we already had to do the last time we were in person. But there are some differences this time, partly because we're in the sanctuary, and, you know, frankly, partly just because we are further along the road, the vaccinations are in place, and so some of the things we did in the past to keep people safe are not as necessary this time. So we've been able to relax a few of the things. And kind of along those same lines, understand that even as we go back with these requirements in place, that these are not, of course, in any way permanent. Instead, you know, they are a continual work in progress. Even the schedule that we announced is a work in progress. You know, this is not going to be our permanent schedule. I just have to iterate that and reiterate that. This is not in any way suggesting that come September, we'll be having a 9 o'clock and an 11 o'clock. There's a chance we might, but that is not a decision anybody has made, nor have we even decided if we're going to continue them throughout the summer. So just be aware that a lot of these things, you know, are what we're doing for this moment in time as we transition and continue to adapt. You know, throughout this whole pandemic, we've needed to be nimble and we need to be willing to change. And that's what we're trying to do right now. And so if you have questions, feel free to raise those. If you have issues and concerns, raise those as well. And we'll certainly take those back to both the task force, and then from them, task force will make recommendations to the church council, which Jason will lead. And then we will, you know, and then we will move forward. So we wanted to share these with you tonight. And just very briefly, in a nutshell, the goal is to have a 9 o'clock and an 11 o'clock in person in the sanctuary service. Okay, what that means is if you were attending the parking lot service, we will not be offering that any longer. However, for those few individuals who still would not be comfortable being in the sanctuary, if they need to receive Holy Communion still on Sunday morning, we encourage them to come after the late service, so after the 11 o'clock service at 11:45, where they can. I will be outside at that point, and then they can receive Holy Communion then. We're not going to do that after the 9 o'clock service because, well, we're assuming most people there at the 9 o'clock are, you know, actually in the service, and then we'll be taking it in the course of the service itself. So the basic schedule is 9 and 11. We don't know what we're going to do more than kind of 6 weeks out. When we get, when we get to the middle of May, we'll evaluate what the numbers are looking like and what people are telling us about the summer. And then we'll make a decision as to whether or not we'll continue both during the summer. That is completely up in the air at this moment in time. Our focus is just what can we do for the next 5 weeks. So other things to consider, in very, very brief, broad brushstrokes, you still have to wear masks and we still have to socially distance. The main reason for that is the county still has those orders in force. And so wearing masks, everybody who comes in has to wear a mask. The only ones taking their masks off will be those up at the altar, you know, who for the reason of people being able to clearly kind of see our lips as we're speaking, both for in-person as well as the streamed service at 9, you know, we will take our mask off long enough for that. But then when we're sitting there, we'll put our mask back on just like everybody else will. The difference this time with masks is that this time we can sing with our mask on. We are going to have singing with mask on. All we ask is that we do so in a kind of a normal speaking voice and or a hum or your speaking voice. The main reason is when extra aerosol particles are released, it's usually when you're shouting, when you're laughing, when you're coughing, when you're sneezing, you know, where you're putting more force behind it. And so that is just what we would ask, that you keep your mask on and you sing in a softer voice than you might if you were singing a great, wonderful Easter hymn and having to belt it out. So no belting it out right now. We have to hold off on that. Other things, social distancing. So social distancing is going to be practiced in a couple of different ways. The first way is our seating has been reconfigured in the sanctuary. And so what we've tried to do is, Jason did a wonderful seating chart. One side of the sanctuary will be for large parties, anything basically over 2. So 3, 4, 5, 6 in a household will be on the left side, which is the lectern side, the piano side. The right side of the sanctuary will be for single individuals or couples. And so we get more kind of households or bubbles per pew in that configuration, just because we can kind of space them a little bit differently. Where the other ones, it's harder to separate them, just because 6 people could take up, if they spread out, they could take up most of the pews. So, we just have to space the pews further apart. So ushers will usher people in. And so you don't get to pick your seat. Instead, the ushers will take you in, and we start at the front and we move to the back. Start at the front, move to the back. At the end of the service, the ushers will come in and they will release people. So in that case, they start at the back and move to the front. The main reason is we don't want people lingering in the aisle, kind of walking by people and chatting with people as they go by. The point is not to have people stand and have a 5-minute conversation in the aisle like we typically would do. Why? Because this is what we're used to doing. And when we go back in the sanctuary, the temptation is we'll just go back to business as usual. So hopefully people will understand, at least for a few weeks, we're going to be doing this. It may be that when we get to June, we won't need to do the seating by the ushers, but that's something that remains to be seen. We just need to see, we're going to see how it goes. This is just our plan for how we're starting it. This is how we're starting it. And then we'll see over time if we need to continue it. In terms of, and like I said, you can't pick your seat. The ushers are just going to take you so that it's easier and quicker just to get people in. And it's also sometimes a little challenging based on the size of the party to find the right spot. So it's going to be incumbent upon the ushers to do that. For example, if we have to keep the handicaps seating open. We can't put somebody there right away. So the ushers might skip a seat. So don't be offended. If you see a seat open in front of you and they take you back 2 rows from that open seat, because that may be a spot that is for an accessible seat, and they have to leave that open until the end of the service to make sure we don't have somebody come in a walker or a wheelchair. So we don't have a lot of seating like that, but there is some. And so we're going to try to take that into consideration as we go through this. Other measures, after the service, we would ask that when you leave the service, that you go immediately out. So that when you leave the service, we don't linger in the narthex. If we want to visit with our friends and check in with people, we can do so outside rather than inside. To that end, I won't stand inside. I'm going to stand at the door of the building, and I will be right outside the door. So that way people come out. If they want to greet me, they got to come outside. And we'll talk outside. We may even do some things to encourage that, like, go out and get some containers of Tim Hortons coffee or something to put them on a table out there to encourage people to go out there and visit out there rather than visiting inside. You can obviously use the restrooms, but the only restrooms open are the ones on the track, not the ones in the hallway, not the ones in Luther Hall, just the ones out off of the track. So those are the bathrooms that you'll be using. And I think the only other thing was communion. So communion will be done like we do the parking lot. So when you come into the sanctuary, when you first come into the building, they will hand you the baggie for your party, whatever size that is. They'll hand you those supplies for communion, and you'll take it with you to your seat. And then once you're seated, then at the end, the communion, because we're streaming that first service, communion actually will take place at the very end of the service. It'll be the last thing we do. It won't go in that spot that's about 3/4 of the way through. We'll sign off, and then all of us who are present will take communion. The primary reason being, I don't want to have people who are watching from home feel excluded by us all celebrating communion, and they just have to watch us take communion. It's easy enough. It's easy enough for us just to shift it to the end, and then we're not kind of being flagrantly celebrating communion kind of right in front of them. So we'll just do it at the end, and it'll be very similar to what people have experienced in the parking lot. And then when you're done with that, we'll do a common dismissal, and then the ushers will escort people out, and you can just deposit your, kind of the packaging and everything. There'll be trash cans out in the back that you can place it in as you leave the sanctuary. So that's the general overview, so then I'm curious to hear what questions any of you have. And if you don't have any, Jason can go through our FAQ sheet, the frequently asked questions, to see if there's any others that might come up.
I just have one question. Is the bishop the one kind of deciding not to have communion during the 9 o'clock service? I mean, if you could tell people that are watching it, that if they get their own bread and maybe juice or a little bit of wine, that they could have communion the same time we would?
Yes, absolutely. That is absolutely the case. Our synod has a much more conservative policy on the sacrament than I think some pastors may have, both in our synod and other synods. The bishop, and frankly, the worship committee itself said, for now, people need to, the sacrament is for when we're all gathered together, and it's something that's administered by the congregation. It's not something that we kind of freelance at home. And even though we are in a pandemic and people have had to wait a while, we feel like we have made some allowances to allow that to take place. And that, so for example, if somebody watches online at 9, then, coming at 11:30 to do the drive-through is similar enough to what we did before that we feel comfortable about that. And as we did before, we will redouble our efforts to let people know. Our home communion ministers will bring it to them, and take it right to them if that's something that they need. But, knowing that there are a lot of people who might be watching who are not necessarily our members, but might just be random people, I do not feel, and I know the bishop didn't feel comfortable with us just inviting them to kind of feel free to just administer the sacrament for themselves. That's something that we need to still have grounded in the congregation. And if we're going to make that kind of change, then that's something I think that needs more conversation and thought. I would encourage you, Ivy, if that's something that you really want to advocate for, that we bring it up at the worship committee meeting and we can have some more conversation about it there. That's certainly a very valid conversation for us to bring up again. But we were maintaining consistency with what we had said earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. Very good. So yeah, any new questions? I'm just kind of adding them to the Q&A list, and then we'll review that tomorrow at task force, make any additional edits that we feel like we need to make, and then we'll release that to the rest of the congregation now. So that was good.
What other questions?
I'll throw a couple out there, and then we'll see if that jogs anybody's thoughts. Talked about wearing a mask. Should folks feel obligated to attend, members and otherwise? We think it's completely acceptable. Trinity Lutheran Church thinks that it's completely acceptable to continue to worship from home, especially if you're at risk or are concerned about wearing masks. So no, you should not feel obligated to attend. You talked about the seating arrangements. We do have to do the reservations. You talked about that, correct?
Don't think I did. So the reservation system, just a word about the reservation system. First of all, if you were thinking to come at 9 o'clock this week, you need to think again. Totally full, and we already have a waiting list. You might be able to convince somebody that already signed up to change and go to another service. And if you offer them enough cash, I think they might. We might be open to, auctioning off some spaces. There's, I think, some good fundraising and stewardship that might take place there. Right, Phil? It's a whole new funding stream for our ministry, but, but not to make too light of it, we have filled up already. We had an outstanding response from the congregation from people who want to be back. I will say this for those on this call. Right now, the goal, the way we have our socially distanced seating set up, we have about 70 some spaces, and reservations have room for about 55 to 60, depending just on the size of the households. Because we have to allow for about we figure 15 to 20 that just as many times as we email something out, they're going to ignore it, and or they're going to be afraid of technology, or they just won't feel like calling, and or just visitors who hear that we're having in-person worship, and we have to leave room for people who just show up. So we have, in essence, kind of a built-in cushion. So at least for a couple of weeks, that's what we're going to be doing. Right now, we are full at 9, but 11 o'clock is a long way from being full. I do not anticipate 11 o'clock filling up. Although I was surprised, in 2 days, we already have 20 people signed up for 11 o'clock even. So I was excited about that. But yeah, you do need to do the reservations, but reservations can be done using the simple church link that Kyra sent out. You can also call the office, and you can also email the office. 3 different ways that you can make your reservation. If it fills up, the online one will lock and no one else can sign up. So like for now, if you tried to go online and use the simple church for 9 o'clock, it would kick you out. At that point, if you are kicked out, you can call or email the office, and Kyra will put you on a waiting list. And then if we had people who canceled, then we would add your name on in place of their name. So we'll add your name on in place of their name and put you in instead. So we do have that option. What I would encourage is if you get locked out, strongly consider just trying 11 instead that week. I mean, I know it's an inconvenience to change that service time. For some people, it's not possible because of sports practices or games. But certainly if it is possible, consider making that change. The other thing, just for all of you to know, next week is Confirmation Sunday. I strongly urge you, if you want to sign up for 9, you better be the first one, when that link opens up on Monday, because that thing is going to fill up very fast, only because we have a lot of confirmation families and they're going to probably take up half of the space. And so just realize that I will be encouraging all of you to go to 11 o'clock that week. Just because. I mean, that being said, if you get on early, you might be able to do it. The confirmation families, we will make sure there's room for them. They will be registered. In fact, I think they already are registered. They've kind of pre-registered with their family and guests, just so they all can make sure they're there. And they will be seated differently than the rest of us. We make the assumption that they're all in the same bubble. If they're going to be at a party all day together, we make the assumption that they're comfortable sitting together, in which case then we'll kind of fill a pew with that family instead of spacing them out all over the sanctuary. And in that way, we can fit more people in too. It will increase the capacity for that week. So
just 2 questions, quick.
Yeah.
So I take it then every Sunday we need to put in our reservation. In other words, if you're 11 o'clock or 9 o'clock, it's not that you're going to be automatically you have to do it every week. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Because every week, like this week is fine, but next week is confirmation.
Sure.
And then
I understand that.
And yeah,
I understand that.
it's just because every week's different. You never know what somebody might need to come for. You know what I mean? So we don't want to make the assumption that everyone is always going to be there.
Sure. And how many kids are getting confirmed this year?
We have 6 being confirmed this year. Yeah. Yeah, we're excited.
My question, we've talked about the overflow into the narthex if necessary.
Yeah,
Is that going to be only implemented if we have several show up that didn't have reservations, and then we will use the narthex? We are going to, obviously we're not going to encourage the narthex overflow.
Yeah, I mean, put it this way, our goal, our primary goal is to not utilize the narthex if we can avoid it, only because one, it's not the safest arrangement, simply because, we can't socially distance people as adequately out there. And more importantly, anyone going to and from the bathrooms is going to be, and well, not to mention the ushers, there's just going to be a lot of traffic through there. It's not, and on top of that, the sight lines are terrible. Being able to see anything is, all we have is these little windows and the door. So to be able to see, and now that we're driven by a screen and not bulletins, we want them to be able to participate, and it will just be more challenging back there than it would be if they were out, up into the sanctuary. We are planning on using it. I mean, some of our seating on Jason's chart is already planned to be the narthex, in particular for those with mobility issues, because there's no problem putting, back there somebody in a walker or wheelchair. That's about as accessible as you can get, since they don't have to get in and out of a pew. So we are, those are kind of the reserved spaces for that. And then on top of that, we know that there still might be more that come, especially on something like Confirmation Sunday. People might just show up, in which case then, unless we're really overflowing, our goal is not to turn our own way.
Good questions.
You mentioned cancellation. So when I make a reservation, am I told that if I cannot keep that reservation, I'm to cancel, or may there be, is that made clear to people as you make your reservation about the cancellation?
I don't know what it actually says on that site. That's something that we're still fine tuning. I mean, it's been more kind of as we're talking that we're talking about cancellations, and already we've had some. I mean, believe it or not, somebody had signed up like the first day, and then the second day they already called and had to cancel. Like today, they called and canceled already. So we've already had a couple, and this is like day one. I'm thinking more it's hopefully people just being courteous and remembering that on their own. I'll have to ask Kyra what's actually on the site. I don't remember what's on the site, but that should be something. If Jason's making notes, that we should probably add to the Q&A, our frequently asked questions site. That's a great call.
If it's the thing I printed out, I don't see anything about cancellation.
Okay.
Yeah, and I had
On my paper anyway.
Yeah,
So,
it might not be there. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a
okay.
good point.
But yeah, people should be courteous enough to,
Yeah, and so there will be somebody who's monitoring it, because obviously Kyra's only monitoring it up through like 1 or 2 o'clock on Thursday. After 1 or 2 o'clock on Thursday, then Kyra's not monitoring it anymore. So our goal will be, we'll have another volunteer from the church who's willing to kind of keep track of registrations. Because at the end of the day, they have to, at the end of the week, or maybe on Saturday, print up a list that goes to the ushers. Because then the ushers, when you arrive, will be checking, because that's the other thing. We have to check and make sure who actually did make a reservation. And so they'll be seated kind of up in the sanctuary, and we'll probably have some chairs in the narthex that if you didn't make a reservation, that we'll have you sit in until it's closer to the time the service is supposed to start. Unless it's a situation like 11, where we're not worried in any way that we're going to go over. Because 11 o'clock, we wouldn't have to worry about it. 11 is more, I don't even know why we have to register for 11. I'm not really worried about it. I could be really surprised and we could fill up this week, but I'm not necessarily anticipating that being a problem with the late service.
Does Dave have to clean the church in between services?
No. CDC has changed its guidelines. They're not as concerned about the issues with people touching surfaces. So for example, the pews, we're not as concerned about that. We might walk by with a quick, Lysol wipe and just wipe down the backs of the backs of the pews that were used. But we're not going to try using foggers or anything like that. The CDC's guidelines have changed for that. And they've said that it isn't as likely to be transmitted in that way. Now, that being said, what we will have to do is have maybe our ushers or other volunteers wipe down like the door handles and those kinds of things, the commonly touched surfaces where you might have lots of people touching them. But we're not really as worried about people like in a pew, just one set of people touching that pew back. It's the regularly touched surfaces like the doors and door handles and such.
I'm glad to hear that, because I didn't think that would be necessary anyway, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they have relaxed.
Just extra work.
We were very thankful because it was going to be very costly. I mean, we did look into it, and it would be about, it would cost us about $50 to $75 a week to fog the sanctuary.
We don't need that. We don't need that, at least not in my opinion.
Good question.
Do you have a plan for adult Sunday school for the classes that are meeting between the services?
So, I kind of wrote this up in the guidelines that we sent out with the original email. So what's going to happen is when service is done, you'll get ushered outside. And we ask everybody to go out. Even if you're going to an adult Sunday school class, you go outside. Wait for everybody to get out, or at least most people. I mean, some people might be lingering a little longer, but in general, get everybody out. And then if people want to go back to their classrooms, then they can. Meanwhile, the Sunday school kids that have children's activities will get ushered downstairs. They may go downstairs right away if they don't need a parent to take them. That we don't have a problem with them going downstairs and starting their Sunday school activities right away. Because Angela and Ann have Sunday school things planned even though they have children's church during the service, after service, Ann has games and activities. Angela has music. So there's a number of things that they do with the kids in that, probably for maybe 20 to 30 minutes after service. So there will be some things happening. But yeah, Sunday school classes, people will leave, and then once everybody's gone, everybody gets their coffee and then goes back in again and can go back to their classrooms.
So you're okay with the adult classes going back to their classrooms?
They can, as long as they follow guidelines, which means spreading out, wearing your mask, no food or drink. If you're gonna be inside, limit food and drink. So you can't everybody have their mask off and sit there the whole class.
Right.
And so that's why you have to, to follow the guidelines means, and the thing we'll have to watch is, which rooms we use will depend upon the size of the classes. Again, they have to stay spread out. So that's why, we'll be working on this. Our goal right now is in-person worship.
Right.
Sunday school classes are gravy, right? I mean, that's a luxury, because at the end of the day, that's a very small percentage of our congregation compared to those who want to worship. Right now, my priority is let's get us all back in the sanctuary. And I think we have enough of a plan that each individual group can kind of work amongst themselves to figure out the best time. What I will say is they don't necessarily have to go back into the classroom they were in before, and they don't have to do it at the time they did it before. The Berean class, they've done so well during the week on Zoom, they may decide to continue that for all I know, because they gained people when they went to the weekday meetings. And maybe that would be the case for some of the others too. But at this point, the priority, our number one goal is get back in the sanctuary.
So the times of the services could change as far as like our classes meeting at 10:15. If we go to 11, we hit the second service. So if we only go for a half an hour, it becomes shorter.
Yeah, again, that's going to be up to your class, right? That's individual class's responsibility. We're not legislating that. Our goal was, how can we have 2 services on Sunday morning?
Okay.
9 and 11. And only reason we chose 9 and 11 is we've been doing 9 and 11. That was the goal, because we need our congregation back in worship. I'm not as worried about how the Sunday school sorts themselves out. However you guys need to make it work. And frankly, it may very well be that you don't have anyone going to the 11 o'clock service. So if you start at 10:15 and run to 11:15, no one's going to care. As long as you don't have any of your group members, or say 4 of your group members are not, going to the 11, but one's going to 11. Well, then the one who's going to 11 can just leave when they need to and go and join the service. 11 o'clock will be so much smaller and probably more flexible, that coming and going from that service is not probably going to be as much of a challenge as it will be for the 9. The 9 is the big challenge, just because that's going to be full. And so trying to seat everyone and do traffic control is going to be important.
Question, I'm sorry, I got one more question. It's kind of late for it, but at the 11 o'clock, they will have communion, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
correct. Just like 9. Yeah.
Because I see at 11:45 is going to be drive-through, which I assumed is the cars coming through.
Yeah, that's just for people. Yeah, that's
So
just.
that service will be shorter so that you can be out there then for the people coming through in their car.
Absolutely. Yeah. 11 o'clock service is designed to be similar to what the parking lot service has been, which is a shorter service. Partly because, like the special music and the children's choirs, special events, all of those will take place at the first service. They aren't going to take place at second service.
And all that special music will be, I assume, recorded ahead of time, or will we see anything live at all?
We will have, when you ask about what the Yeah,
Like
in terms of
music.
special music, yeah, will be predominantly, and I say this predominantly, it's going to be recorded ahead.
Okay.
But Angela always reserves the right, to change her mind on that.
Okay.
That's something that there may be something, she will be playing, prelude music. She will be playing in-person postlude music. So those things she will be doing. And as time goes along, it may be that she finds some singers who are willing to, some song leaders or a soloist who's willing to sing with her mask. And if they're willing to do that, Angela's happy about doing that. But this point, because things have been this moved rapidly, Angela records her music a few weeks out, and as a result, everything for now is recorded. The hymns are recorded with a song leader ahead, and the special music is recorded ahead. And those things all are already, they've already been recorded. And at least for the next couple of weeks, that's her plan. Like for Confirmation Sunday, Mother's Day, that's all going to get recorded ahead. And then after that, then Angela is going to start looking at some other options. Again, I mean, we're trying to make this as simple as we can for now. And then as time goes along, adapt off of this kind of restart platform.
Good questions. There's an item in here about entrance and exit. I think encouraging folks to park in the upper parking lot just makes it easier to kind of funnel people around. It's not a requirement, just an encouragement item there. Can I hang around after the service? I think Pastor Willer talked about. Yeah, we're just asking folks to do, all of the congregation outside. If they want to catch up with folks, just ask that you do that outside to encourage, that way folks can stay distanced and safe. And I added the comments about the Sunday school and the fact that we will have folks exit, and then once the sanctuary is clear, we'll give word that folks can then re-enter to get to their classroom, just to limit folks having to kind of cross paths there. You already talked about different things that are closed, water fountains and bathrooms, things like that. Talked about communion. Bulletins, I don't think you talked about that. Trying to leverage the new projection screens that Doug and Greg were able to get installed. They look phenomenal from what I've seen. I haven't obviously been in a service to see them in action, but that will happen soon enough. So we'll try to leverage that just to limit the amount of paper that we have to print and distribute. But there'll be a few out there, always willing to take some feedback on that.
Word on those, we will, it's not that we're not producing a bulletin. Kyra will still do what we've done all along, which is email out bulletins to all of you. You're more than welcome to print a bulletin. We're not saying you can't print your own. We're just saying we would prefer to not be printing them as a church and then having people standing there, again, in close proximity, having to hand them out, and just having multiple people handle them. I mean, it's just, again, a little bit safer of a practice. Everything you need will be up on the screen. And like I said, you'll get your bulletin, emailed to you just as we've been doing. So feel free to continue to print that. There's nothing wrong with doing that, or use your phone. I have mine on my tablet, and so I'll be using my tablet. So,
any thought that you could, instead of handing them out, I realize they don't want to hand them to the people as they come. How about putting a bulletin or two in the pews that you have, wherever you have your spaces, just have one or two bulletins there, and either the family can share it, or, a single person has it, or a couple can share a bulletin. Just have them already in the pew, and nobody has to hand anything out. And then they'd have their bulletin if they want it. It's just a thought.
yeah, that's certainly something that task force can talk about. I know in our initial plans that wasn't what the group had planned, but that's certainly something that can be discussed.
I think the only other one that I see, Pastor Will, that we haven't covered was Coffee and hot water for beverages, for hot beverages. Not planning to offer that at this time. Are we okay with people bringing their own? It says that, but we're trying to.
I think whether we're okay with it or not, they're going to. So, I just choose to go with the flow rather than be the coffee mug police. I have a few coffee mug police who I think will probably push back against that, but
I was gonna say, I hope we aren't gonna kick anybody out. I mean, I don't bring anything, but I hope we would never send somebody away because of that.
Well, how do you drink with a mask on? I've had a little trouble doing
You
it.
pull it down, you drink it, you put it back up.
Does it
Now, you
run
aren't
down
gonna
the
give,
front of my-
you aren't gonna hurt anybody, Doug.
exactly. I hear exactly what you're saying, Doug. But at the same time, people have gotten so accustomed to having their coffee at home, and it's going to be it's a transition. I'll just say it that way. It's a transition. So we hope they use their best wisdom, their best discretion. And even before the pandemic, when people did bring a coffee mug, it's not like I saw them, the entire service, with a mug up to their mouth drinking. I mean, it was, they'd sneak a drink here, they sneak a drink there. So same thing with somebody bringing their bottle of water. I know people who need to continually drink water because they get allergies and a scratchy throat. So I'd rather they do that than start hacking and coughing. So, I think we could just, if we saw that it was an issue, then we could I could see it being an issue, right? Because if I go to Panera, I know there are people who sit there and they hold a coffee mug and they take their mask off. And then 15 minutes later, the mask is still off. Well, that's not what we're going to allow. This is, pull it down, take a quick sip, and then put your mask back if you have to. But
They're not gonna be sitting in church talking anyway, so they aren't gonna be pulling down their mask, Doug. So I don't like to see people with it anyway, but if they wanna bring it, I'm certainly not gonna kick them out of the church. I hope we don't.
yeah, no. I don't think we have any coffee police in the building. I have a few who grumble about it, but I don't see anybody running up to somebody and chasing them out with a broom because they have a coffee mug. So. Any of you have other questions? I think those are the ones that we had on our frequently asked questions list, at least the ones we anticipated as questions. What other questions do you have? One that didn't come up yet, but that I know is kind of out there is, so what happens if someone is in a bubble with someone else? For example, if one of our older members regularly drives another member everywhere to all their doctor's appointments, can they drive them to church and then sit together in the pew? And the answer we've been saying is yes, because they're an existing bubble. Same thing would be if grandparents are bringing their kids. Clearly they're in a different household, but a grandparent bringing their children and grandchildren to church, clearly that is, if you're regularly around each other, then we consider you a bubble. And, we're not going to have an issue with that. Again, it goes back to the registrations, but you have to register though as that group, so if you've registered separately, we can't then combine you into a group. Or more importantly, if you register 2, you can't show up on Sunday with 5. Okay. Just because you registered 2 doesn't mean you can bring 5. So like if Tricia signs herself up, but she doesn't sign up the rest of her family, she can't just then on Sunday morning show up with Dan and the boys. I mean, I'm not going to make them not come, but at the same time, the intent is that you sign up the number of people that will be sitting together. That is most advantageous to us. That makes sense to everybody? I mean, does that seem clear enough? I mean, not in the FAQ, but in the guidelines I sent out before, that's how I phrased it, in household or bubble seated together. All the new terms we learned during pandemic, bubble is one of them, my bubble of people. So never thought of a bubble before, but I suppose I have one. All right, anything else you have? You are not a talkative group tonight. This is just,
So, we had during Pastor Shutt's funeral, we had the issue where people just sat, the ushers would lead them somewhere and then they'd just get up and go somewhere else. And we just, at that time didn't feel right with the funeral situation, upsetting people even more than what they were already upset. So, by the death or whatever. I can see a similar thing maybe happening here, maybe not. I don't know, where people just get up and sit where they want to. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But yeah, I think it's the kind of thing where I'd rather not make an issue of it at the service, but then perhaps, talk to them after the service. But yeah, I'm not sure what kind of instructions will be given to the ushers.
no, yeah, I agree, Phil. I think that's, it's hard during a service to address it, but certainly that's very clear in our guidelines. That was spelled out into what you can expect when you're being seated is, you'll be escorted to a seat and you're asked to stay in that seat, not move to your favorite seat and not join somebody else. Because when we were in the gym, that did happen where people would sit down and then they'd notice, right before the service starting, someone sitting alone. So then they'd get up and walk across the whole gym to go sit with somebody else. And they had good intentions. They wanted to sit with that person to keep them company. But yeah, our intent is that, you find a seat and then you're not find, you're, kind of escorted to a seat and then we stay in that one seat because there were reasons why it made sense to the ushers to seat them there. So we just trust that people will at least initially respect the ushers. And as I said before, my hope would be, and again, it just depends on how things go. My hope would be that by, say June, our ushers are not going to have to do as much for escorting people and seating people, because either one, we get to the point where our county has a lot of vaccinations and our incident rate has gone down, or two, we've just kind of figured out on our own how to socially distance in the sanctuary, and households just kind of figure out, how we're doing it. All we have to do is just kind of block off pews, and then it just makes it more comfortable for people on their own to go and find places to sit. So, and we might refine too how we do that seating. So I think some of that stuff will happen kind of over time. People will just become more accustomed to it. And hopefully then we can kind of relax things and it won't be so stressful for the ushers. The only last thing I would say, yeah, go ahead, Elaine.
On the Courier breaking news this afternoon, Hancock County has only 85 active virus cases.
Hey, that would be great news. That's going back down.
Courier breaking news today.
That would be great if it starts back down again, because.
And I think it said only maybe 5 hospitalized.
Yeah.
Sign on to courier.com tonight and see for sure, but.
Yeah, that would be great news, because, it was not a great thing for us to be going to in-person worship while our numbers were going up. So it's nice that they now are on the way back down again. So makes me certainly feel a little bit better.
Do we have a number that we want to reach before we let more people into the church? Are we given a number that we need to reach before we can say we have 100 in church instead of 75? Or
right now we're still following the governor's orders. So,
no, okay.
When this is just we're just following health department orders. So, and those things are subject to change. So, what seems like sometimes at a whim, but yeah, they tend to change at the direction and the instruction of the governor. I think for now, as long as we're still trying to do our best, task force will what you need to understand is task force weekly or bi-weekly at least sits down and we get an update from the medical professionals in the county over where the county's at, what the county health directors, the director of the county health department is asking us to do, and not just us, but all nonprofits and businesses. And then we kind of take those things into consideration as we start to make decisions. So that's what we've been doing up to this point. And we kind of bucked that a little bit by going in person, even though we're still red. But, we felt like because of the vaccination rate that we were on solid ground to do that. And we will be changing some of those guidelines and setting some new benchmarks. And that's something that the task force is going to be doing once we get back to in-person, is kind of setting benchmarks for, all right, when are we going to make the other changes we want to make? Like, masks and social distancing. So those things are coming, just have to trust that task force will keep its job up, but they've been very diligent, and I'm so thankful for everybody who has been part of that task force. I mean, there's like, Jason, how many are on the task force, would you say? Is it 14 of us on the task force now, or 12?
Yeah, probably 12 is probably the number.
Yeah. I mean, you don't realize how much, I don't think anyone outside of task force and council understands how many hours we have spent on, planning and, trying to come up with devising guidelines and then, figuring out how to implement it. I mean, it has to be at a minimum in the last 3 months, we've probably spent 20, 25 hours a month on this, all told, with all the behind the scenes stuff. So it's just been a lot of time, a lot of meetings, 3-hour council meetings and 2.5-hour task force meetings. And so you should be really thankful for your fellow members who volunteered their time like that, because, people like Jason and Doug and Shirley and Marilyn, who are on this call, they all spent lots of time doing that. And I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, with that, I actually have to drop off to get on another call. So thank you all for your time. I captured all the comments that you made so far. If anything strikes you, feel free to add it. I appreciate you all joining. It's great. You don't have to end the call just because I have to drop, but I do need to get to the next call. So thanks a lot. Look forward to seeing folks on Sunday, and we'll go from there. We'll continue to evolve. So thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it.
See you, Jason.
Bye.
Yeah, and just to kind of reiterate too, I mean, all of this is continuing to be a work in progress. So if you have other thoughts, if you have other questions that pop up, feel free to shoot those questions, comments, suggestions, to Jason, to myself, and we will take that to the task force and have them, kind of strategize and think about those things that you bring up, and then we will see how that finds its way into some of these plans. A lot of the changes we've made are specifically because of questions that congregation members brought up as they either went to the services in the fall, or even some of our run-through services that we've done with smaller groups. So certainly any other feedback you can give us would be greatly appreciated. We're just thankful we can, start the process. And certainly we were thankful that people were as faithful as they were, while we were building up to this. We are in a different place than we were 12 months ago, and that's not all bad. We have many, many more people that worship with us who aren't even in our state. Just in the last 2 months, I found about 4 or 5 individuals who worship with us every single week and who are in another state. And because of a relative or a friend, they found us, and now they faithfully watch and comment. And so it's really kind of exciting to see the way in which the Spirit has spread the mission of this church farther than we could ever have imagined. So God has a bigger plan than any one of us can understand. So any last comments, any last thoughts? Anyone else? Nope. All right. Well, why don't we close with the Lord's Prayer? If you guys could unmute, let's say the Lord's Prayer together. I'll start. Our Father,
Father, who art
in heaven,
Hallowed be
thy
hallowed be thy name.
thy
Thy
kingdom
kingdom come, thy will be done on earth
Earth as it is in heaven.
as in heaven. Give us
Give
this
us
our
our
daily
daily
bread,
and forgive
us our
us as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but
for us from
from
evil.
evil.
put
Thine
on
is
us
the
Kingdom,
and the glory and the good forever. Amen. All right. Thank you all for being on tonight.
Thank you.
Hope we get to see you this weekend.
Okay.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.